Hey guys, this is Roxann Smithers with Smithers and Ume-Nwagbo, your trusted 360 General Counsel, and this is a note from my Legalpad. So today we're going to be talking about force majeure provisions, and when it simply ain't your fault. So as the world faces both a global health crisis, political and social unrest, as well as natural disasters, many business owners and clients are coming face to face with an obscure provision at the end of their contracts that they did not pay attention to before, and that's the force majeure provision. So we're going to talk about that right now. Essentially, a force majeure provision says that if there are huge events, both locally and sometimes globally, that are going to impact either or both parties' performance of their obligations under the contract, and there are things that are outside of the control of those parties, that the parties are going to have some relief from the obligations of that contract. That could mean any delays will not be held against the party that is required to perform within a certain amount of time. That may mean that a party's inability to provide materials, products, labor force, or other services that they are supposed to provide under that contract are not going to suffer the penalty for them not being able to provide those items at the time. And in many cases, it also can mean the complete cancellation and termination of the contract for both parties. So the force majeure provision, while very often left to the drafter's discretion and not really paid attention to by the parties who are signing the contract, it can have a significant impact on your ability to get out of your obligations in a contract or your ability to hold the other party accountable for their obligations in a contract. Now, the type of events that are often covered in a force majeure provision are acts of God. That's natural disasters, things that are happening beyond any person's control or influence. That's going to be the weather in most cases. You may also have provisions covering labor strikes, labor disputes, labor slowdowns that neither party has control over. Finally, you may often see government action that is considered a force majeure event. That can be a situation where martial law is in place, where the subject of the contract is now being prohibited by the government. New regulations may come in to limit the ability of one or both parties to perform as contemplated in the contract. Or there may be other government actions that prohibit or limit the party's ability to perform. Like we've seen with the COVID-19 crisis, shutdowns, mandates with regards to which businesses can continue to be in operation, how they can be in operation, how many individuals they can serve, the hours that they can be in operation, and sometimes the products or services that they can provide at any time. When those things are regulated by the government, outside of the normal course of business and not as anticipated by the contract, then those government actions may be subject to this force majeure provision. And so, as I said, the point of the force majeure provision is to give the parties some relief from their obligations. For example, if you are required in your business to provide a certain product or service by a certain date, and if you don't provide that, you will be in material breach of your agreement. You may be subject to liquidated damages in any untold amount. Well, if there is a flood that prevents your business from opening, if there are strikes in the labor force that impacts your delivery of services and you getting the materials that you need in order to perform, or heaven forbid, there's government action that requires a stay-at-home order. No one is able to operate their business or perform. then you will have an opportunity to have some relief from that obligation without the penalties that were built into that contract. And that's the real power of the force majeure provision. Depending on how profound the impact is to the contract, it may either allow the parties to delay performance, or it may allow the parties to simply wash their hands of the contract and walk away without penalty. And then depending on who you are in the contract and in terms of the obligations, this could be a great relief and a benefit for you, or it can be a very frustrating situation if you're the party depending on those services, depending upon that product, and particularly if you've already paid in advance for some of those services or those products. And so in negotiating and reviewing force majeure provisions, everybody needs to pay attention to that fine print at the end of the contract that most people do not take the time to read, to digest, or to revise. And a lot of people are finding that their force majeure provision may not be as robust as they need for these situations. I have encountered clients now who are finding force majeure provisions that don't include government actions, or particularly and specifically bar or prohibit public health issues. And so they're not able to apply that provision to the current situation. Other clients are finding that the provisions are broad enough that they can utilize the language that's in the provision to help them with their particular situation and their particular contractual obligations during this pandemic. In all instances, it's important to understand how your provision will play out in your industry and when you're performing, and make sure that the types of activities or the types of disruptions that will prevent you from performing are addressed either specifically or with language that's broad enough to include them in your force majeure provision. Your contract really will be your roadmap to how you're able to respond and what are going to be your rights and obligations if there's a problem that is not anyone's fault. So force majeure provisions are powerful when drafted properly and taken into clear consideration. And they can really help folks deal with the unforeseen that can happen in the world. For more information from the attorneys at Smithers and Ume-Nwagbo, you can find us at stulawgroup.com, on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Please be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you can get the latest notes from my Legalpad.